Hey guys, what's going on? I'm Bo with Round One Productions, and I'm a photographer and cinematographer based here in Georgia. We're going to be doing something pretty cool today. We're actually going to be doing a lighting breakdown and go through basically the ins and outs and how I got a particular image for a recent client. You guys have actually been asking for this for the past year or two, and to be quite honest with you, I've just not had the time to make it happen. With everything that's going on, I have a little bit of spare time, and I figure might as well pass along the knowledge. Alright guys, let's jump right into it. This one's pretty cool because it's 2 different days of the same exact location, same sort of lighting setup. We'll get into that in a second. But basically we had to make them feel like even though these 2 days we got kind of thrown into the wolves a little bit as far as the weather was concerned, 2 completely different days for weather. And how can we make them feel like they're still kind of within the same family? So let's get into it. I'll show you what I'm talking about. All right, before we get into the breakdown, I just want to show you what the final footage looks like. Here's day 1. And here's day 2. All right, as soon as we got there, we knew exactly where we were going to shoot. We knew what angle, we knew where the sun was going to go, we knew all of that. The only problem was what happened for day 2, so stay tuned for that. I had never been to this location before. I got scouting shots to this location that was taken during like kind of an overcast day. And so the scouting shots during an overcast day, I basically asked what were the surroundings, you know, like were we in the shade or whatever? And I was told that we were actually kind of in the shade. They weren't wrong if it's later in the day. There were some really big trees, there was a ton of trees, but at sunrise, which is when we shot this, the sun just, there was no coverage, so it was just blasting full sun. And I knew that immediately when we showed up. I was like, okay, we're gonna have full sun for like a good solid 2 hours at least before it gets behind these trees. So how do we manage that? But obviously the sun is something that we can't harness. You know, it doesn't matter how much camera equipment that we have for the most part. There's no way that we can harness that. So the sun was our basis. We had to dictate everything off of that sun and kind of work backwards. So everything that you're seeing here, this entire front side of her here, literally everything on these bushes, front side here, all of this, that is all sun. Like just straight early morning, just the sun just rising. Where things got a little bit funky is when we first did the first run through, everything looked good except for these archways back here. All back here, and you'll see in another shot too, there's another huge archway over to this side. Where it got difficult is those just went black, like super, super dark. And so there was no level back there and it didn't seem natural. Where those archways were, they were actually being blocked by the staircase, so no actual sunlight from the sunrise was actually getting in there. So basically back here we have 2 2K lights on stands here, one here, and then you won't see the other one, but basically here's an archway and we have another 2K over here. They're just giving a little bit of level to everything that's in the shadows, which would be everything that's in those archways. So those 2 2Ks were a huge necessity, 100%. Like I'm so glad that we ended up having those on set. Without the 2 2Ks that we have in those archways back there, everything else seemed weird, and that's why we had to add them. When even the sun was coming up, it made it seem like our key light was fake, even though it was the sun. It just so happened to be that the sun was rising in kind of a weird spot in relationship to the house that made the archways go completely dark. So I'm so happy that we had those 2Ks to be able to put back there. One thing I will say is like, bring more equipment than you think that you might need, especially when it comes to lighting. I mean, you think you might have the perfect amount and you probably don't have enough. And so that's one thing I would recommend. Kind of think about things that you might not expect, and you're gonna come to find that there are certain lights that you're always kind of constantly drawn to. And don't be afraid to rent those lights for bigger projects, even if you don't know where you're gonna be using them per se, because there's been so many scenarios that I'm like, you get kind of thrown into, you know, certain things and you're like, oh my gosh, thank God I had this thing. The thing that you don't see is basically this is the rear of a house, and these archways here and here go, they're right underneath basically another second level. So there's a whole balcony up here, okay? We put an Arri M18 up here. So we had an Arri M18. Side note, I wish I could have that light forever. It's a beautiful light. We also did rent that from High Output. I'll link them below too. They're an awesome rental house. Anyways, so we had an Arri M18 up on top of the balcony shooting down. We knew that it's an HMI, so we knew that it was going to be a little bit cool in color tone. So I had my assistant Tom. I had him warm it up a little bit. It was either a quarter CTO or a half CTO, just to warm it up a little bit. And you can actually see all of that here, and even down on her shoulder here, and even on the plants over here. So that entire rim here is happening from that M18 up top. Another kind of cool thing is that we actually had, I don't know if you can see back here, but we had, this is all haze. So we had a big hazer going. This was the per client request. They had some inspiration that had some haze. You can see a little bit of the haze kind of pluming up in here in the background. If you watch the video, you can see a little bit more of that. Again, a little bit more of the separation. You have some of that M18 kind of coming through that haze a little bit, and it looks awesome. Like I mentioned before, this morning was super, super cold. When we first showed up, it was just above 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And yeah, basically it didn't warm up pretty much all day. So this was at sunrise. I would say it's probably like 32, 33 degrees, maybe. So keeping the talent comfortable was super important, obviously. And so we had 2 propane heaters. I'm sure you've seen them before, but they're like those big heaters. There's a big propane heater there, big propane heater here. And what you don't see is right on the other side of that archway back there is actually where all the stylists are getting them ready, where they're changing, where hair and makeup is and everything like that. So they're literally going from heated room out the door on the runway. So we had to work really, really quick. When a model was ready, we had to be absolutely ready to rock and roll and get the shot, pull the focus, and nail it, and let them go back in and get warm. So it was definitely tricky. Pulling focus from 40 feet away and then walking full speed toward the camera was definitely tricky, but we got a lot of really cool shots, and I'm really happy how it turned out. All right, so here's the close-up. This kind of gives you a little bit better idea on kind of just her, what we're dealing with as far as the lighting is concerned, and kind of shows you what we're working with. All right, so the entire front section here, this is all early morning sun, okay? Again, we only had this for a little bit of time, so we had to work really fast. And then let me change colors so you can kind of see what I'm just reiterating back here. All of this on her hair. This is all that kicker, that M18, that Arri M18 that was up on top of the balcony up top. So that's all the M18. The cool thing is that M18 filled that entire area of where she was walking. So it doesn't matter where she was on that runway, she was lit, entirely backlit by that M18, which brought her out from the background a little bit more. As you can tell, where her hair level is and where the edge is on her, on the back where the M18 is hitting, is a little bit higher level than what we have the background as. So it just carves her out from the background and just makes her feel a little bit more three-dimensional. And so the funny thing is we had a good amount of time to be able to shoot this stuff, but then we had to break because the sun started coming around to the point where it was really fronty, and you started getting some really weird, just nasty shadows from some of those trees that I had mentioned. So the sun started punching through these pine trees. So we had to take a break, and we had to start again for these runway shots the next morning. We still had a full day of shooting for different lifestyle stuff, but we had to take a break from this runway stuff and then start that in the morning. All right, let's get into day 2. So the interesting thing was day 1, we got dealt a ton of sun, which I actually ended up liking a lot. I think it was really, really beautiful. We had great models that everything looked good on their skin and all that. The funny thing was, in retrospect, is that the next morning was supposed to be super overcast and cloudy. And so we didn't really have two scenes that initially looked similar. And so how do we take that on? You know, how do we make them feel like they're kind of within the same family, I guess, if you will? And so what we ended up doing, we knew we were absolutely not going to have sun all day long. And so basically I asked my assistant to go back to the kind of lighting scenario that we planned for initially. We planned for day one to basically be no direct sun regardless, because we thought that it was going to be all under the shade of the trees. That ended up not being the case, and we ended up really liking all that direct sunlight. We can't replicate that amount of power for the budget that this was. So essentially, we had a decision to make. I went to the art director and let them know that we can still make a look and a feel that feels like it's within the same kind of family, but it's definitely going to be a different look. Instead, I basically offered to do this sort of softer light setup that would, again, feel like it's within the same family, but would be a little bit more lifted in the mid-tones in the shadows. So let's jump right into it. So here we are, we have Zoe again. She's coming down the runway. So the first thing you're going to notice all the way across the board is that the contrast is just way lower. Everything is just going to be a little bit more even than it was day one. Again, they were fine with it on set. They loved how both of them turned out. In fact, they actually liked the variety that they were able to get, so everybody was happy. Okay, first things first, you still see the M18 up on top, rimming her out here, okay? And you also see the M18 a little bit more prevalent today than the first day, because on the trees and the bushes and stuff, just again because it's more powerful without having to compete against the sun. That's all the M18, okay, up on top of that balcony. You can see a little bit more of that haze going on behind her. And then if we switch over to what's happening for the front side of her now, is I had them set up a big 12 by ultra bounce set up right off a frame, okay? And then that ultra bounce is pushing everything from that M18 back into the scene, okay? So everything that you see on the front side of her, that's all the ultra bounce doing the work for us from the M18. We actually have the M18 doing two jobs here. We have the M18 doing the backlight and the hair light and all the accent light to be able to separate her a little bit more from the background, as well as everything else. All the spill from that is hitting that ultra bounce, that 12 by 12, and sending it back to her. Obviously, anytime that I can get a chance to have a budget for a 12 by 12, I take it. It's awesome. No complaints. You will see back here again, going back to the background, I think those 2Ks in the archways on this shot are a little too bright, in my opinion. I wish in retrospect that we would have been able to bring them down just a little bit. That being said, it was a very fast-paced shoot and we just kind of had to manage with it. That being said, I still think it turned out great. There have been a lot of people to do these kind of breakdowns in the past before, but the most recent person to kind of inspire me to do it is my friend Zach. You can follow his Instagram. I'll put it in the description below. Definitely worth a follow. Super good cinematographer based out of New York City. All right, guys, that pretty much does it for this breakdown. I hope I didn't ramble too much. I hope I made sense, and I hope that you learned something. That being said, I'm actually going to be doing more of these moving forward. So if there's anything that you guys want to see from stuff that I've done in the past, whether that be film photography, studio photography, lifestyle photography, or any cinematography stuff that you see as well, just leave a comment or DM me, and we'll make it happen. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. We'll talk soon.